Tonight, we uncover a story buried beneath centuries of faith, a rivalry older than any religion, and a secret that may change everything we think we know about divine power. And they say the walls of Rome hold every secret, but some are buried far deeper as you step into the soft gold glow of a Vatican summer evening in 1983. The kind of evening where the bells hum through the air like distant memories and the cobblestones feel warm beneath your imagined footsteps, and you breathe in the faint mix of incense, old marble, and that strangely persistent smell of archival dust that seems to cling to the holy city as if determined to outlive everyone, including you. And you follow the path once taken by a 15-year-old girl whose walk home became one of the most haunting mysteries Europe ever whispered about. Even though most people now retell it with the hushed seriousness usually reserved for lost relics or malfunctioning espresso machines. And as you move through St. Peter's Square, you feel the eerie tension of a place that pretends to be timeless, even though history here behaves more like a stubborn roommate who refuses to leave, which might explain why this disappearance still lingers like an unfinished hymn. And yes, before we journey any deeper into the labyrinth of secrets and marble corridors, this is the part where I tell you that you probably won't survive this. Though not for dramatic supernatural reasons, but because the Vatican bureaucracy alone has statistically ended more quests for truth than any ancient curse ever recorded, which is simply my gently sarcastic narrator way of preparing you for what comes next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel brave enough, tell me your location and what time it is where you're listening from. Because knowing someone in another corner of the world is staying awake with you makes this whole journey just a little less lonely. Even if we both know your eyelids will start to sink before we reach the deeper layers of tonight's mystery. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together as you drift along via D Porta Angelica, passing the small kiosks selling rosaries, postcards, and those vaguely suspicious snow globes in which miniature St. Peter's Basilica floats as if Rome occasionally experiences whimsical meteorological phenomena, and you imagine the girl weaving through them on that June day when she left her flute lesson at the School of Music located just beyond the Vatican's grasp, unaware that she was walking straight into a mystery that would soon haunt Italian investigators, foreign intelligence agencies, and a surprising number of conspiracy theorists who apparently never sleep. And as you follow her imagined footsteps, you feel Rome breathing around you, the city never quite resting, its heartbeat echoing through the alleyways like someone softly tapping a drum beneath ancient pavement. And you realize that every story here involves another story beneath it, and another beneath that, a never-ending archaeological dig of human ambition, loss, and at least one priest who always seems to know more than he says. Which is why tonight's journey will require both patience and a sense of humor, preferably the kind that allows you to laugh at your own confusion when the narrative timeline starts looping around itself like a careless angel's shoelace. Still, the mainstream historical fact remains firm. On June 22, 1983, Emanuela Orlandi vanished after leaving her flute lesson, a detail so simple it should be the anchor of the case. And yet it instead becomes the first domino in a chain of uncertainties that spirals through politics, religion, and international espionage with the enthusiasm of a runaway carriage, because nothing involving the Vatican ever stays simple for long. And you, standing here in the soft Roman dusk, sense that the truth has always been less like a shining revelation and more like a carefully folded note hidden beneath a bishop's sleeve. And speaking of notes, this is where we drift into the fringe tidbit of the evening, because among the many theories that emerged over the decades, a small but passionately committed group once insisted that Emanuela was secretly taken by a rogue choir of ex-seminarians who believed they could communicate with saints through ultrasonic frequencies, a claim that sounds absolutely ridiculous until you remember that in medieval times someone thought crocodile dung sunscreen was a good idea. So history is not exactly batting 1,000 when it comes to practical judgment. And you keep this in mind as you continue down a narrow alleyway where the air grows cooler and the shadows stretch long and thin like the pages of a forgotten archive file. And as you turn a corner, You feel the weight of unanswered questions settling on your shoulders. Questions scholars still debate, with the gentle phrasing of the evidence remains inconclusive, which is academic code for nobody agrees on anything. But the conference coffee was excellent. And this open scholarly debate phrase echoes through your thoughts as you imagine the investigators trying to untangle a timeline built on phone calls, witness sightings, and the unsettling silence of institutions that excel at silence, sometimes aggressively so. And you walk deeper into the city's dimming glow, feeling the night wrap itself around you like a velvet curtain as the edges of the world soften. Because this is where the first veil of the mystery truly settles in. Not with panic, not with chaos, but with the quiet hum of a girl who should have arrived home and simply didn't. A detail so small it feels impossibly heavy, like misplacing a single bead on a rosary and discovering the entire string has unraveled. And you breathe in slowly, letting the warm air fill your lungs as you follow her ghost-like presence through a moment in history that refuses to settle. A moment frozen in amber like some fragile insect whose wings still shimmer under candlelight, and the streetlights cast halos that flicker gently across the pavement as if blessing your steps. Though you suspect they're just struggling with old wiring, and you allow a soft smile to drift across your thoughts at the absurdity of wandering through a mystery that has ensnared governments, clergy, tourists, and at least one overeager documentary filmmaker who once insisted the answers were encoded in the timing of church bells. A bold theory, though you suspect he may have simply needed a dramatic hook for his trailer. Yet here you stand, or rather, here you float in that dreamlike state between wakefulness and sleep, the city breathing with you, the story opening. Like an ancient door whose hinges sigh beneath the weight of years. And you realize that this tale is not just about disappearance, but about the shifting currents of power, fear, and the quiet resilience of those left searching in the dark. Currents that pull you forward as the night deepens and the Vatican's silhouette rises like a whisper against the sky, urging you to step further into the unknown as the first chapter of this mystery closes its hands gently around your senses, preparing you for what waits in the deeper halls to come. You slip now into the quieter veins of the Vatican, the places where the air grows still and the marble seems to listen, because marble here always listens, and you move with that soft, dreamlike caution of someone who is both searching and being searched for, drifting past frescoes that stare back with eyes far too knowing for comfort, though you tell yourself it's just the lighting and not some ancient saint judging your posture. Still, the deeper you walk, the more you sense the whispers. Not literal ones, of course. This is PG-13, after all, but the textured hush of old stone remembering more than it should, carrying rumors the way linen carries incense. And tonight those rumors wrap around you like smoke as you wander into the corridors where Emanuela's name was once spoken only in cautious, measured tones, as if the mere act of acknowledging her might loosen something dangerous or simply inconvenient, depending on whom you ask, because the Vatican has always treated truth like a delicate manuscript. Valuable, yes, but better kept locked unless someone important requests a viewing. And you breathe in the scent of polished floors, beeswax, and that faint metallic whisper that always accompanies old keys, wondering how many of these hallways were walked by men who already knew more than they would ever say. And you imagine them adjusting their cassocks, clearing their throats, and stepping into conversations shaped with the finesse of diplomats avoiding landmines, which to be fair is a skill Vatican officials have perfected over centuries, possibly around the same time they figured out how to make bureaucracy feel like an Olympic sport. And as you walk, your footsteps echo softly, blending into the quiet thrum of distant ventilation, a kind of artificial Gregorian chant that accompanies you as naturally as breath, while the walls, tall and pale and endlessly patient, seem to lean in just slightly, as if eager for you to hear what they heard. Back in those early days when the case was fresh and hope had not yet frayed like an aging tapestry. For in the beginning, the whispers suggested everything from a simple abduction to a tangled web involving political demands, ransom calls, and shadowy groups who claimed responsibility with the confidence of students turning in late homework. Lots of theatrics, minimal consistency. And you shake your head gently at the weirdness of it all, because somehow these corridors have hosted secret conclaves, papal elections, theological debates. And yet the disappearance of one teenage girl produced more wild speculation than the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a true testament to humanity's love for mystery, or perhaps our inability to resist a narrative that refuses to settle. Still, as you pass through a small cloistered garden where lemon trees glint faintly under the moonlight like tiny lanterns, you recall the mainstream historical fact that the Orlandi case soon involved an alleged connection to Mehmet Ali Agca, the man who attempted to assassinate Pope John Paul II just 2 years earlier. And even though his statements were inconsistent enough to resemble a poorly organized grocery list, investigators could not ignore the possibility that Emanuela's disappearance was woven into the geopolitical tensions of the era. And you let that settle in your mind like a pebble dropped into water, ripples spreading outward into the deeper parts of tonight's story. Yet the Vatican, despite its layers of secrecy, was not immune to sensational theories. And this brings us to the quirky tidbit floating through these halls like a mischievous moth. At one point, a fringe rumor circulated that a hidden choir room beneath the Apostolic Palace had been used as a sort of acoustical portal where the girl's voice could supposedly be heard if someone sang the correct harmonic sequence. An idea that blends mystical resonance with the world's most impractical escape room. And even though it sounds absurd, you find yourself smiling because history is full of moments when people believed stranger things, like the time ancient Egyptians genuinely praised that crocodile dung sunscreen we mentioned earlier, proof that humanity's decision-making has always been a bit of a wild ride. And as you wander past a row of ornate wooden doors whose carvings depict saints looking slightly stressed, perhaps from centuries of watching humans make questionable choices, you hear that familiar academic phrasing echoes softly in your memory. The evidence remains inconclusive. The open scholarly debate phrase that scholars still use when discussing whether the Vatican's role was protective, negligent, or quietly strategic. And the uncertainty hangs in the air like incense that refuses to dissipate, clinging to your senses as you drift deeper into the labyrinth of corridors where conversations were once held in whispers, in shadows, in offices where blinds were drawn. Even on cloudy days, because secrecy here has never been an accident. You walk past a staircase spiraling downward like a strand of ancient DNA, each step carrying the soft promise of more questions, more half-truths, more hints tucked into footnotes of reports that never saw daylight. And the marble rails feel cool beneath your hand as though they've been waiting for someone to trace their patterns and feel how truth sometimes hides in the smallest grooves. And as you breathe in again, slow and steady, the Vatican night folds its arms around you, guiding you gently toward the lines of inquiry that investigators once followed like breadcrumbs, though more often those crumbs led straight into walls, locked offices, or the polite but impenetrable smiles of officials who had mastered the art of saying nothing while sounding profoundly helpful, a skill you secretly wish you had during awkward family gatherings. Still, you keep moving, absorbing the muted glow of lanterns, reflecting off polished stone as the tension between faith and secrecy wraps around you like a velvet shroud, not suffocating, just heavy enough to remind you that many people, even today, believe the answers were known all along, but buried beneath layers of protocol, politics, and papal silence. A belief as unprovable as it is persistent. You notice a fresco depicting angels swirling through clouds, and you imagine them rolling their celestial eyes at the fact that humans have been debating this case for 40 years without consensus, which feels entirely on brand for us. And as you step into a long corridor lit by a single flickering bulb that seems determined to provide ambience rather than illumination, you feel the story tugging you forward, whispering that the next layer lies just ahead, past the doors where clerics once paused before speaking, past the documents stamped with half-legible signatures, past the rumors that grew legs and sprinted into public imagination. Because somewhere beneath all this marble hum lies the echo of a girl's laughter, a flute's faint melody, a life interrupted yet somehow still walking beside you as you follow the soft pulse of mystery guiding you deeper, deeper, deeper into the Vatican night. You move now into the long-shadowed stretch of Vatican City where secrecy stops being a poetic concept and becomes something with weight, something with texture, Something that feels like a pair of unseen eyes resting on the back of your neck, even though you keep telling yourself it's just the draft coming from a nearby ventilation grate. And as you take another slow step forward, you sense the presence of the men who once circled this case. Not as guardians, not as villains, but as watchers. A category that has always existed in Rome, extending from ancient centuries to modern men in tailored suits who pretend they're not listening when they absolutely are, and you breathe in the faint metallic tang of old radios, worn keys, and bureaucratic coffee that probably tasted like peanuts, drifting deeper into the part of the city where investigators, informants, and intelligence agents once wove a tapestry of half-truths so tangled that even the truth seemed embarrassed to exist in the same room. And as you follow this path, the air shifts from incense-scented solemnity to the dusty, prolonged sigh of offices where fluorescent lights buzz like irritated bees, the kind of sound that makes you question every life choice that led you into a mystery this convoluted. And yet here you are, walking calmly, gently, almost sleepily through the aftermath of decades of speculation, your fingertips brushing the cool stone walls that once heard conversations spoken so quietly you'd swear the syllables were afraid to be overheard. And you can almost picture the Italian investigators hunched over battered desks, their files thick, their expressions thicker, each page describing witness sightings more contradictory than the next, because nothing involving this disappearance ever aligned neatly, a fact that becomes clearer the longer you linger in these softly humming corridors. You pass a doorway left slightly ajar, revealing the faint outline of an old corkboard, littered with fading photographs and scribbled notes, and you let your imagination fill in the rest. Maps of Rome with colored pushpins, timelines stretching from floor to ceiling, names connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Though to be fair, some of the investigators genuinely believed they were on the verge of uncovering a transnational criminal network that might have stretched from Italy to Eastern Europe, an idea that doesn't sound quite as theatrical when you remember that in the early 1980s, intelligence agencies traded information with the same enthusiasm that children trade stickers, except less cooperative and with far more paperwork. And here, in this space between truth and theater, you encounter the mainstream historical fact that Interpol and several European intelligence units became entangled in the Orlandi case. Not because they fully understood it, but because the web around her disappearance extended into political territories, where silence could be interpreted as complicity, and Rome in the 1980s was a city humming with Cold War tension, mafia alliances, and a Vatican deeply entangled in financial and diplomatic struggles, all of which made the disappearance of one teenage girl not merely tragic, but symbolically explosive, the kind of case that drew watchers from every direction, some interested in justice, others interested in leverage, and a few who simply disliked unsolved puzzles because they upset the cosmic order of their meticulously organized filing cabinets. You drift further into the imagined locus of these watchers, feeling the subtle chill of a hallway illuminated by a single, stubborn lamp, and it reminds you that even in the most powerful city within a city, light sometimes flickers with the same uncertainty as human conviction, and then, as gently as a whisper, the fringe tidbit of this section slips into your thoughts, because among the rumors circulating at the time, one particularly bizarre claim insisted that a group of men pretending to be foreign diplomats were actually undercover opera critics who used their reviews as coded messages. A theory so strange it deserves a moment of respectful silence, partly because it demonstrates humanity's astonishing ability to create chaos from thin air, and partly because somewhere out there, someone truly believed that Puccini held the key to solving an international disappearance, which tells you everything you need to know about the infinite stretch of the human imagination. And as you continue walking, gently, slowly, the soft cadence of your pace aligning with the warm, rhythmic hush of your breathing, you hear echoing in your mind the open scholarly debate phrase, "The evidence remains inconclusive," because scholars, journalists, and investigators have never agreed on whether the watchers were protecting Vatican interests, monitoring foreign involvement, or simply creating the illusion of progress, a debate that continues today in conference rooms where historians sip espresso, gesture dramatically, and occasionally sigh into their notes, because no mystery this old should still be this resistant to clarity. You step past a row of tall windows where moonlight filters in like brushed silver, illuminating dust motes that drift lazily through the air. And you imagine these silent floating particles as the last remnants of conversations long gone. Words that once held urgency, but now dissolve into atmosphere, because time treats all secrets the same, with patience, persistence, and a firm willingness to outlast every man who once guarded them. And you move farther along the corridor into a space where heavy drapes soften the world into muted reds and golds, and the ambience feels almost theatrical, as if the watchers themselves were perpetual actors in a play whose script kept changing, leaving them to improvise motives and intentions while desperately pretending. They knew the ending, and you allow yourself a soft smile at the mental image of a stern intelligence officer quietly panicking because someone rearranged his timeline chart. Proof that even in the world of espionage, the most terrifying adversary might be a co-worker with chaotic organizational habits. Still, beneath the layers of misdirection, human error, and unintentional comedy, you sense the ache of genuine families searching for answers, their voices lost among the official statements. Crafted with the diplomatic precision of someone trying to wrap a wildfire in a napkin, and this ache settles into your awareness like a quiet fog, softening the edges of the story as you move toward the heart of what the watchers truly saw. Not just the disappearance itself, but the way the Vatican reacted, the way Rome shifted, the way hundreds of tiny details accumulated into a mosaic so intricate that even now, decades later, every new theory feels like placing one more tile into a picture no one can fully see. And as the corridor stretches ahead, dim and endless, you breathe slowly, letting the story fold gently around your senses like a cloak woven from moonlight and uncertainty. And you realize that the men who watched were not a single group, but a constellation of motives, some noble, some opportunistic, some so muddled they barely qualify as motives at all. And yet every one of them shaped the path we are following tonight, guiding you deeper, deeper, deeper into the cool silence where the truth waits, patient and unhurried, for you to join it in the next chapter of this unfolding mystery. You step now into the soft, blurred territory of time itself, the hours that slipped between Emanuela's last confirmed sighting and the moment the world realized she was gone. And as you move forward, the Vatican night seems to fold in around you like a heavy velvet curtain, muting the world into shades of gold and blue while your footsteps echo with that gentle ASMR hush that comes when a story begins tilting toward the fragile places, the places where timelines fray and memory becomes a fog window no one can quite wipe clean. And you breathe slowly as you enter this liminal stretch of Rome, where the hours between daylight and darkness take on their own strange logic, where witnesses suddenly appear and vanish like fireflies, their recollections shimmering, contradictory, and occasionally infused with the kind of confidence only humans possess when they're remembering something incorrectly but with great enthusiasm. And you feel yourself drifting alongside them, past bus stops, past street vendors closing for the night, past the soft hum of traffic along Corso Vittorio, each location trying to anchor you, trying to hold your attention, yet somehow failing to solidify into one coherent truth, because the missing hours have never behaved like obedient historical data. They move instead like restless shadows, slipping past your grasp just when you think you've found a corner sturdy enough to hold them still. You pause at the edge of Piazza Navona, the fountain sighing under moonlight, and imagine investigators standing here decades ago, weary and bewildered, thumbing through their notes while pigeons judged them from overhead balconies, because nothing inspires existential reflection quite like an Italian pigeon staring deep into your soul. And you inhale the warm summer air as you picture those early days of frantic searching, the phone calls, the flyers taped to lampposts, the whispered prayers, lit in chapels where candles flickered with the subtle impatience of flames that had seen too much. Yet despite all the noise, the one thing no one could ever reconstruct was the exact chain of events between the girl leaving her flute lesson and the disappearance itself. A gap that yawns like an unlit stage waiting for actors who never show up. And even now, as you wander through this imagined reconstruction, the street lamps glow faintly as if tired from decades of illuminating theories that never quite aligned, casting halos on the cobblestones that make you think of the halos in frescoes. Perfect, radiant, and entirely unhelpful when solving real-world mysteries. This is where the mainstream historical fact enters with the authority of a librarian shushing a noisy debate. Multiple witnesses claimed they saw Emanuela speaking with a man offering her a job with a cosmetics company, a detail that became one of the case's central pillars, though the company later denied any such recruitment, which left investigators clutching timelines like damp laundry, heavy, uncooperative, and prone to losing shape. Still, the detail persists, hovering in the missing. Hours like a lantern whose light doesn't quite reach the walls, and you feel its presence as you continue through the narrowing corridor of time, a corridor that seems to shift each time you try to pin it down, like one of those trick mirrors in old fun houses that reflect your shape in ways that make you question your life choices and dietary habits. But every mystery, no matter how somber, comes bundled with at least one truly baffling fringe tidbit, and tonight's offering is particularly bizarre. Among the more eccentric theories proposed over the decades was the claim that the missing hours corresponded exactly to an astrological phenomenon involving Venus, two malfunctioning satellites, and a prophecy allegedly discovered in a drawer mislabeled kitchen supplies, a detail so gloriously absurd you almost want to applaud the imagination required to produce it. And as you breathe, soft and slow, you acknowledge that while this theory has all the scientific rigor of a weather report drawn in crayon, it still highlights something important: the human desperation to fill empty time with meaning. Even if the meaning comes from celestial misalignment, rogue satellites, or mislabeled drawers, all of which feel like metaphors for your own attempts to organize your workspace. Still, the scholars discuss the missing hours with the same delicate phrasing you've heard before. The evidence remains inconclusive, the open debate phrase that acts like a polite shrug wearing academic robes. And you imagine conferences where historians present timelines that look less like sequential events and more like spaghetti diagrams sculpted by someone who had never actually seen spaghetti. Which is ironic given the country in which this whole mystery unfolds. And as you follow this thought, you drift into a quieter street where the night becomes thick and fragrant, the air holding traces of basil, old stone, and the faint sweetness of gelato melting somewhere far off, an aroma that reminds you that Rome, even in moments of deep sorrow, never stops offering small comforts to those willing to smell them. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the missing hours pulse around you in warm, circular waves, and when you open them again, you're standing before a shuttered storefront where one late witness claimed to have seen the girl laughing, relaxed, as if unaware of any impending danger. Another, interviewed years later, insisted she looked distressed, scanning the street as if searching for a way out. And you find yourself caught between these two ghost images, both plausible, both fragile, both fading at the edges like watercolor left in rain. And you realize that this is why the missing hours matter so profoundly. Not because they hold the entire key to the case, but because they refuse to shape themselves into certainty, leaving a hollow where clarity should live, a hollow into which generations of onlookers have projected fear, hope, suspicion, and the occasional astrologically confused theory about Venus. You walk onward, your shoes clicking softly in a rhythm that feels almost musical, and the city seems to guide you now, not with clarity but with gentle persistence, leading you down winding alleys that empty into wide plazas glowing with lamplight, each one representing a version of what might have happened, each one offering a breadcrumb that leads you straight into fog. And as you drift toward the river, the Tiber shimmering beneath its bridges like a dark ribbon threaded with moonlight, you sense the story unspooling in your hands, delicate, resistant, and somehow alive, as if the missing hours themselves are breathing beside you, matching your pace, whispering that they will not give up their secrets, not entirely, not even to you. And yet you keep walking, slowly, softly, because this is what we humans do in the face of gaps. We search, we speculate, we construct fragile towers of narrative to reach what we cannot see, towers that wobble in the slightest breeze but still feel worth building. And as the shadows deepen and the sounds of Rome become a distant lullaby, you feel the story pulling you forward toward the long, quiet stretch of night where the truth lies waiting. Not hostile, not welcoming, simply patient, ready for you as you move toward the next chapter. You step now into the final chamber of this long, winding mystery, the place where all the threads, political, spiritual, whispered, imagined, gather into a quiet stillness that feels almost like fog settling over warm stone. And as you move forward, the Vatican night softens into a deep blue hush, a kind of velvet silence that wraps around your shoulders as gently as candle smoke curling upward in a side chapel, guiding you toward the truth not with urgency, but with the slow, drowsy persistence of something that has waited decades to be touched. You breathe, slow and steady, and the rhythm of your steps becomes part of the atmosphere, folding into the warm breath of Rome as you make your way toward the part of the story that has always resisted illumination, the part that scholars argue over, families ache over, and the Vatican quietly circles with the kind of caution usually reserved for relics wrapped in too many layers of muslin. You drift past the edge of St. Peter's Square again, though now it feels different, emptier, wider, more receptive to the weight of what remains unsolved. And the cobblestones beneath you seem to hum with the faint residue of thousands of footsteps that came before, footsteps of investigators, journalists, dreamers, tourists clutching melting gelato, and those shadowy watchers who once trailed the Orlandi family, as though hoping a clue might slip loose simply by existing near them. And you inhale the scent of warm stone, basil drifting from a distant window, and the faintest trace of incense lingering like a ghost that never learned how to leave. And you realize you are walking through an ending that was never allowed to be an ending, a story that left itself open like a book missing its final page, inviting the world to write a conclusion no one could agree on. This is where the final mainstream historical fact steps quietly into the center of the narrative, wearing the solemn gravity of years. In 2012, investigators opened a tomb in the Basilica of Sant Apollinare in search of Emanuela's remains, acting on a tip that linked her disappearance to Enrico de Pitas, a notorious Roman gangster who had been buried in the church. A burial so unusual it still raises eyebrows like synchronized choreography, and while nothing conclusive was found, the act itself confirmed something long suspected, that the disappearance had grown beyond a single event into a symbol of the tangled, sometimes uncomfortable intersections between the Vatican, the criminal underworld, and the unresolved shadows beneath Rome's polished surface. But because no mystery in this story emerges without a hint of the bizarre, here comes the fringe tidbit drifting in like a stray violin note. According to one persistent rumor, de Pitas was buried with a silver key that supposedly opened a locker somewhere beneath the Vatican. An idea so theatrical it feels like it wandered in from the screenplay of an overly ambitious treasure hunt movie, yet it circulated nonetheless, whispered with the same conviction people once used when insisting. Crocodile dung sunscreen was a perfectly reasonable invention, and though no key was ever found, and the locker was never proven to exist, the rumor endures like a superstition that refuses to be evicted, humming beneath the narrative with that delightful mix of absurdity and possibility that makes human imagination both glorious and exhausting. And hovering above all this is the open scholarly debate, the phrasing that slips into conferences and late-night conversations alike. The evidence remains inconclusive, the gentle surrender of experts who have combed through testimony, timelines, archives, and atmospheric disturbances with the diligence of monks restoring ancient manuscripts, only to find that every new clue opens another corridor rather than closing one. And you imagine them now, historians, criminologists, theologians, sitting in dim lecture halls with their hands steepled, their expressions weary, each one acknowledging that the truth remains not lost, exactly, but folded, tucked, recessed into a corner where certainty cannot reach. You walk deeper still, guided not by clues anymore, but by the emotional resonance of the story, by the soft ache carried by Emanuela's family, by the strange, jagged hope that sometimes flickered into new life when a witness emerged only to dissolve again when the details unraveled. And you feel the weight of those decades as though they were beads on a rosary, each one warmed by the fingers of someone searching for solace in a mystery that refused to close, and the Vatican walls around you hold this weight too, the stone infused with hundreds of quiet prayers murmured in chapels where candles flicker like hesitant heartbeats, prayers that rise into rafters carved centuries before Emanuela was born, merging the old with the new in that uniquely Roman way where time refuses to stay separated. The hour grows late now, though time in this narrative feels strangely fluid, stretching and warming like soft wax beneath a candle flame. And as you approach the final bend of this journey, the sounds of the city begin to dissolve. The distant motorbike hum fades, footsteps soften, even the breeze seems to slow as though unwilling to disrupt what comes next. You step into a courtyard washed in moonlight, the stones glowing faintly as though illuminated from within, and here, in this quietest of spaces, you encounter the truth that has always remained. Not a revelation, not a dramatic unveiling, not a confession tucked behind a hidden panel in a cardinal's office, but the simple, aching understanding that some mysteries do not end because the world is not always structured to provide tidy resolutions, and the disappearance of one girl, one life, one voice, became woven into the Vatican's tapestry so tightly that removing it now would unravel far more than it would restore. And so the secret that remains is not a key, nor a locker, nor a signed confession. It is the unsettling knowledge that the unanswered questions have become part of the story itself, part of the atmosphere that hangs over Rome each summer evening, a presence in the marble corridors, a soft absence beside every candle lit for lost children, a reminder that unresolved grief can echo for generations without ever losing strength. Now, as the final 300 words of this journey slip into a softer rhythm, the narrative begins to slow, like a lantern dimming gently at the end of a long vigil. You breathe in deeply, letting the night settle into your chest, warm and reassuring, and the Vatican around you grows quieter still, its edges blurring into a watercolor wash of blue and gold, shapes dissolving, shadows softening, the world folding itself into a lullaby of stone and moonlight. You walk slowly through the courtyard, each step lighter than the last, your awareness drifting as though carried on a breeze that barely exists, a breeze that brushes your cheek like a whisper of ancient prayers, and the air grows warmer, softer, almost luminous, as though the city itself wants to ease you into rest after all this wandering, all this searching. The marble beneath your feet seems to pulse gently, like a heartbeat cradling your own, inviting you to let the unanswered questions fade for now, not disappear, but soften, loosen, drift like dust motes glowing in a sunbeam. And you let them drift, feeling their edges blur, their weight diminish, until the story becomes not a puzzle to solve, but a quiet companion settling beside you in the dark, reminding you that some truths arrive not as answers, but as peace. You breathe again, slower now, your eyelids growing heavy as the courtyard melts into warm shadow, and the moon above you glows like a guardian watching from far away, its light stroking the stones in long, soothing strokes. And you feel yourself sinking into the gentleness of this moment, the softness of the night, the warmth of the city that has held its secrets for so long, and will continue holding them long after you sleep. The mystery does not close, but it quiets enough for your thoughts to settle, for your breath to deepen, for your mind to drift into the soft cradle of night, comforted by the rhythm of the story, the silence of the Vatican, the echo of a girl whose memory lingers like a single candle burning slow and steady in the dark. And as all of this fades into a final whisper, the narrative settles into stillness, gentle and complete, sweet dreams.